on Tuesday, and Robbie and I were talking. I was like, dude, we got so much to do. We got to do this. We got to do that. That's my Robbie impersonation. Hey, what's going on, man? How you doing? So I brought all these backdrops with me, had everything shipped to my place so that it'd be easier if I just drove it down and a lot cheaper. It was like $2,000. If anybody wants to make money, get into logistics and ship from Canada to the United States because you can charge a lot of money. So we had everything shipped to my place so I could drive everything back down here. So anyway, long story short, I was so excited that I'm like, I've got to crash before I take off driving, man. 1:30 a.m. on Tuesday. I was down here by 3 p.m. on Tuesday. I couldn't go to bed. I was so excited to get here. I packed everything up and grabbed some caffeine and hit the road. About 35 minutes into the drive, I was like this. What am I doing? So the windows went down 42 degrees, and I never looked back. I stopped twice. Only peed my pants once, but I made it. It was a rental car, so we're good. Is Hopkins in the house? Astronaut diapers. I'm going to invest in a catheter next time. What's that? Drink it. Yeah. Dave Moore, where are you at? I'm going to heal myself. All right, here we go. This guy, very, very just crucial in so many videos and learning. And once again, it goes back to this common denominator that we all have this thing now that we just can't shut this off. We want to learn. We want to learn. We want to learn. And I can say this, Richard Hopkins is one of those guys that I caught myself watching a lot and going, okay, cool. Plus his name was catchy. I do marketing. So when somebody has something that rhymes, I love it, especially when it makes sense. And I can't say enough about this guy. So I won't. I'll let him do his thing. But Richard Hopkins is also known as Mr. Thrive and Survive. So come on out, Richard. Here we go. I can't wait. If he's here, where'd he go? That's John Gabrielson. Is he still talking? That's the other thing too. We go out there and you see somebody like, hey, I'm coming your way to talk to you, and you hit 3 or 4 people. But here he goes, Richard. Thanks, Rich.
Thanks, Rich. Howdy, everyone. People everywhere, huh? Well, it's good to see everybody here in Raleigh. I've been looking forward to this for quite a while. And I was going to have this nice high-tech presentation for you. And I got on the plane and rewrote my whole thing. So the reason for that is I think we've come to a part where we have to realize that you guys in the audience are the next phase of this movement, if that's what you want to call it. There's been, a few dozen people, generally speaking, who have been online, YouTube, Facebook, whatever, who have done videos and some work and things like that. But for the most part, we're individuals working separately. And if anybody has ever been, for example, in a business or other group session where you get 4 or 5 or even more people together, or even just 2, and you go back and forth with different ideas and brainstorming and things like that, you suddenly become geniuses, where nobody in the whole group by themselves would be a genius by themselves. And I don't think any of us are geniuses either. We just decided to look. So I think to keep this going, I think a lot of people can probably realize we're in sort of a transitional phase here where the brand newness of the whole flat earth idea is not quite as fresh and that new car smell anymore. So to keep it going and to expand it out into the rest of the universe of the earth is to get people like you to get together. And I think we need to have somebody come up with some sort of repository or depository where everybody can put their evidences, their empirical evidences together so that it stacks up as high as a mountain so that anybody anywhere who sees it can come to the conclusion that you have. There's nothing better than bringing people to the truth. Nothing. And that's why we're so passionate about it. So what I wanted to do is I'm going to go over a whole bunch of different empirical evidences that I and others have come up with in the last couple of years. I want to start with, for the people that are not familiar with me, how I got into believing that the earth was flat, and just go from there and give you some ideas of out-of-the-box thinking that I'm talking about that will come together if you get together as a group of people to do this. And maybe those of us who have been doing this online or whatever, we can find ways to get together and have group conversations to come up with more. Now, recently, I've been involved with a group on YouTube called the Sun and Moon Group. It's very small. There's only a couple thousand people that are subscribed to it. But there's some real genius in the group and what comes together when people combine their forces together. So that's the sort of the idea. But let's go down some of the things that led me to where I am today and hopefully where we can lead others. I want to start with some of my background. I started as a 4 or 5-year-old, very interested in anything science, but particularly earth science, weather in particular. I was always a weatherman from a small kid. By the time I was a teenager, at 15, 16 years old, I remember my friend Rob, who went into the Navy with me, he would tease me. He was like, what 16-year-old was reading a book called Air Fluid Dynamics? And I'm not going to pretend to know the math that was in it at the time anyway. At that time, I'm dating myself, but in high school in the 70s, you didn't generally get past Algebra 2 in the 12th grade. And, that's taught now, I think, in maybe middle school. But by the time you got to air fluid dynamics, you're talking about a lot of quadratic equations and beyond that. So I didn't know the math, but I was so interested in the earth science that it propelled me into other things. I was into model rocketry. I also did chemistry experiments, observation. That is what empirical evidence is. Empirical evidence is simply observation, which you observe with your senses. Now, science was to say, no, you have to have all this mathematics to prove things. Mathematics doesn't prove anything. It can't prove anything. All mathematics can do is explain a phenomenon. Mathematics can explain that things fall to the earth at 9.8 meters per second squared, but it can't tell you if it's gravity doing that or density, buoyancy, and magnetic force. All it can do is explain. And that's one of the things that we have to get people that are not into this to understand, little details like that. And we need to teach people to do more than just surface observations. And when I first saw what's the guy's name, Norwicki, who took the picture of Chicago. Many of you, I'm sure, have seen the picture of Chicago from 60 miles. That's what got me into the Flat Earth movement. It was on Jaring's channel. My channel had nothing to do with Flat Earth. It had to do with economic collapse, prepping, different things like that. And I happened to see, YouTube on the side has the feed of other videos. They had a weatherman, obviously a weatherman, standing in front of a picture, which I wasn't sure about how little it is, that it was Chicago, but I clicked on it just because I wanted to see what this weatherman was talking about with the city in the background. And as soon as I saw it, and their explanation that it was a superior mirage, and I'm leaving out a little bit here. I was in the Navy for 4 years. I was professionally a weatherman in the Navy on the USS John F. Kennedy. So being out at sea and being a weather observer for years, I know what a superior mirage looked like. And that picture was not a superior mirage. Now, I just recently searched for that picture once again, and they do have somebody who has taken a picture with superior mirage of Chicago. And what's interesting is you can see how it's upside down, it's faded, it's kind of transparent, translucent looking. But also you'll notice if you look closely at the bottom of even this picture, real small, you can see that there's Chicago at the bottom. The whole works that, the Norwicki picture was greatly zoomed in so that you could actually see the buildings, almost down to the bottom. But when I saw that, and I've always thought logically, I couldn't come up with anything else. And trust me, I was trying to come up with something else that could explain it. It took me a long time to build up 2,500 subscribers on my channel into the prepping movement and things like that. And I knew this would, if I announced this, I was rapidly going to lose probably most of them, and I have. They're, as far as I know, they're all gone. Maybe 2 or 3 are there from the very beginning. In fact, the very first thing was, Rich, you better drop this because people are going to lose confidence in you. And my thing is, I got to go with the truth wherever it takes me. And that's just the way it is. Now, unfortunately, I'm a little ashamed that I didn't come to Flat Earth through the Bible, because I thought I really knew the Bible well. But I did what everybody else does. I cognitive dissonance myself on certain verses, meaning, thinking what it has to mean something else, or it's not exactly probably the right translation. The bottom line there is, if anybody has any doubts, go to Joshua 10 and read there and see that the sun stood still and the moon stood still. And with both of them standing still, you can't have a Gil-Broussard theory that God somehow caused Nibiru to pull the earth down 20 degrees or 30 degrees so that Israel would have a longer day. I'm sorry, but the moon would not stand still in that case. The moon is supposedly rotating around us, correct? So even that has a lot of flaws to it. So let's start getting into a few things. Oh, speaking of cognitive dissonance, I wanted to go back, and I was looking that up, and I happened to come across once again, how many people have seen the video where in the 1960s, at the end of the broadcast day, it's not like it is today, in the 1960s, at 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night, whenever the local news ended on television, they would play the national anthem. And at the bottom, it would say, "Oh, say, can you see?" You would have the words. And how many have seen the subliminal that was put into that? Oh, many of you. Good. Very good. It would say, the words, actually, when you really slow it down, would say, "Trust the government. The government is God." That type of thing. You can search that. Just search on Google for subliminals in the national anthem. It'll pop right up. You'll see it. And there's several very good videos out there. And I decided to scroll down and see the comments. And the very first comment with like 29 thumbs up, and it wasn't that popular of a video, was, "Oh, this isn't true. The CIA," because at the end of it, it said MK Ultra, except it didn't have the MK, it had Ultra, and then some other code word that later came out was the secret CIA code words for it. The person wrote in the thing that this isn't true because the CIA wouldn't put their secret code name up there. So this isn't true. The government never did that. This is a perfect cognitive dissonance response for someone who hasn't done any research whatsoever. This particular event with this commercial came out in congressional hearings in the 1970s, where the CIA admitted they were using subliminals. What was the result? They promised not to do it again. The spineless Congress did not pass a law stating you can't do it, so they settled for a promise. So do you think they're not doing it anymore for us? If it was good then, I'm sure it's good now. So I think that's a good example of cognitive dissonance and what most people have had, because most people do not want to believe that they've been fooled. But I think the empirical evidence when we get here is going to show that there's so much of it. And I've looked at so little. One human being can only do so much. And I implore each of you, I walk my dog twice a day, early in the morning at sunrise and at sunset. I have seen so many miracles. I actually prayed for them, though. Crepuscular rays that come out and then come back together over top of me, all kind of weird things, rainbows that lasted till past sunset, where I actually could see them coming towards me. I thought at first it was getting bigger, but it was actually moving towards me. And I actually took pictures on my phone to record it, which means the sun was getting further away as the rainbow was moving. Now, the rainbow in particular is a very good example, and I'm skipping around here a little bit, but the rainbow is a perfect example of science not telling us truth. Science admits that a rainbow cannot be created indoors. unless you have two reflectors. It's got to have two indoors. So outside, we know rain is one reflector. What's the other one? Yeah, sunlight off the dome. We don't see the sunlight directly. And there's other evidence we have of that as well, empirical and observational evidence. The ball Earth and a flat Earth both cannot explain why on the equinox dates we see sunrise within a degree or two all over the Earth at 090 degrees and sunset within a degree or two of 270 degrees on the equinox dates. Now, I did a video where I held a glass up and said, if the light is on the other side, and I put the sun on the other side of the glass, and I moved my head back and forth, meaning you're moving on the Earth south and north, the sun would follow you the whole way. So when the sun gets into a certain position on the equinox dates, if you're looking at the sun through a reflection, not directly, you will all see it at 090 degrees and 270 degrees. There's no other way to explain that I know of. And there's other evidence that has come out from this eclipse, which I think is NASA's worst nightmare, this eclipse that just occurred in North America. And we're going to talk a little bit about that too. How many people saw that just before the eclipse came out, that they ran a video saying, you're going to see all these little, what they said, pinpricks that were going to cause these images of the moon on, the images of the eclipse cast on the ground. Has anybody seen those pictures? Okay, look those up. They're amazing. Thousands and thousands of pictures of the eclipse, whatever phase it was in, being cast onto the ground at one time. Now, NASA, 2 or 3 days in advance, they've been covering eclipses for what? Since they were here in 1945, 50, whatever they were invented or put together. And we've never heard this. But what they realized this time was now we have P900s, which is Flat Earth's greatest tool. We have P900s, and they know people were going to be observing this, and there's enough people out there now questioning the official narrative to where we would notice it. So they tried to get out in front of that. And they said, well, it's just little pinpricks. Well, there's a couple problems they have with that. And those are, some of them stack one on top of the other. And where they stack, they're brighter. Not all of them are at the same angle. Some of them are slightly off one way or the other. So pinpricks through leaves, which is what they said caused it, will not cause that. Observations from balloons that were in the air, 75,000 feet at the time of the eclipse, showed orbs in front of the sun that were doing the exact same thing. They were overlapping one another. They would cause like Vesica Pisces type of overlaps and stacks. Those exact same things, empirical evidence would tell you that at least there's a chance that is what's being cast to the Earth. Pinholes don't explain it. So let's take a look at some of these things here. Oh, the other thing too is, how many people have heard it's settled science? And how many, the Earth is a spinning ball. It's been settled for 400, 500 years. Our science, we have to look at everything, guys. Everything is a lie. Someone on the Sun and Moon group did a search online and found a newspaper article. I think it's 1903. I could be a couple years off, but circa 1900 in England. And in the newspaper, a person, in fact, let me actually read it to you. Schools of Portsmouth in the Kingdom of England, this is a quote now, have been teaching the damnable and heretical doctrine that the Earth is a sphere. So this is 1903. They're teaching a heretical doctrine that the Earth is a sphere in England. They go on to say it's called seditious and treasonous doctrine. The person's name, a taxpayer, we all pay taxes for the schools, right? Ebenezer Breach was his name, a taxpayer, called attention to the matter. And I'm quoting again, quote, Ebenezer and his friends know, of course, that the Earth is flat as a pancake, corrupting their children. So this has not been settled science for 400, 500 years. It's been being taught in schools in the last 100 years. Now, we all know that we have revisionist scientists, we have those too, don't we? We have revisionist science history with the Vietnam War, for example, the Gulf of Tonkin incident. Conspiracy theorists say there was a Gulf of Tonkin incident. Of course, 25 years later, when nobody cares, the truth comes out. That's what it was that caused the Vietnam War. It was a setup. And I could go on and on, but that's not what we're talking about here. So anyway, the Chicago picture forced me to go into the scientific method once again. Now, I'm not going to teach elementary school science, but let me give a little refresher. You basically have to start with a hypothesis. The hypothesis here is the Earth is a round spinning ball. But then you have a problem. If a problem arises with your law, your theory, whatever it is, then you have to explore and test and see if it holds up to the scrutiny. Well, the problem is with the picture, it appears that we saw way too much of Chicago for the Earth to be flat. I mean, for it to be a sphere. So the next step in the scientific method is to collect empirical data and perform experiments and controls and see what comes out. Again, these are done with our senses. There's nothing magical about needing a laboratory with $50,000 or $2 million worth of material. You can go out and see things with your eyes and hands and feel things and hear things. You don't have to know that a lightning bolt was near you if you just heard a loud clap of thunder. We can make these things from science, these conclusions. And again, if any contradiction to the evidence is found, that we need to change the law, theory, or theorem that science has come up with. Let's talk about gravity for a second. Gravity is the magic pill, isn't it? Why do they not want to get rid of it? Well, let's look at a couple of things with gravity first. Is there any exceptions to the rule? Gravity says that all things are attracted towards the center of the Earth, except for smoke, except for clouds, except for hot air balloons, except for helium, and on and on and on. Why does gravity not work with a wooden ship on the ocean? It's buoyancy and density. Why do things attract to the Earth? I personally believe, and we're getting into this in some of the advanced talks, that we need to look at everything as more a Tesla type of system than Einstein system. And what that means is that we're getting into electromagnetics, dielectrics, and different things like that. They explain so much, and one of the people that really is doing a great job with that, I've done 2 parts so far, I got to finish it on my channel, is a guy named Chris Monk-Seeley, who has come up with so much empirical evidence from the last eclipse. He's the one that discovered that there was nothing in front of the moon. I mean, in front of the sun. There was no moon there that blocked it. Mike Helmick, Helmick, I think is how it's spelled. Check his channel out if you haven't seen his channel. He does a great job showing through colors and different things like that, light spectrums, that the moon was not in front of the sun. It simply was not there. What blocked it is a deep story that I won't get into. So let's get into some of the empirical evidence we have looked at since I've gotten into it anyway. So if the Earth is flat, it's obviously not spinning, because that would cause all kind of issues. And again, it's not settled science. Now, I could put a chart up here. I could do a famous little PowerPoint chart that I hate. That's why I rewrote this. I just hate PowerPoint, guys. Sorry. I don't know why I have an aversion to it, but I do. But I could put a chart up here and say, here's all the evidence we have that the Earth is not moving and that it's flat. But let's stick with the moving part. And then I could put on the other side, what does science say about the Earth moving? Nothing. They have given us no practical examples other than you see the stars move at night and the sun and moon move. That's proof that the Earth is spinning. But that's a 50-50 proposition. Either it's moving or we are moving. Now, when you're out at sea, and many of you have experienced this in a car or whatever, and you have something move, and you have no reference point, you're not sure if you're moving or it's moving. You might slam on the brake because you think you're drifting. You ever had that experience? Relative motion, exactly. So what do? You have to, if you're out at sea and you see a boat going around you, how do you know if you're the one moving or the boat is moving? With no other reference, and trust me, you see that all the time out at sea. You have no distant reference point, especially if it's foggy and cloudy, no sun. You have to put your hand in the water. And we have somebody that actually did that, and I'll get to that in a second, so to speak. We have Michelson-Morley experiments, Sagnac, other Michelson experiments, Michelson-Gale, and others who came up with him. These are experiments done in the 1800s, late 1800s, which showed, without a doubt, that the Earth does not move. Now, you'll get people that'll dig in and say, no, they were trying to prove that the ether exists or doesn't exist. No, get in and dig and read what it really says. They were using interferometers and different things like that, how light moves when you put motion to it. And that's why Einstein became such a genius, and he was elevated. Because he said, well, they can't really tell because it just so happens that the light expanded at just the right amount of time or just the right amount of space so that they couldn't tell if the Earth was moving or not. Okay? So how do you get around that? This is where I get with thinking outside the box. Or someone named George Biddle, Airy's failure. He came up with a way to put your hand in the water. He's the one that came up with a telescope. If you haven't heard of Airy's failure, this is a must. You must learn Airy's failure. I have done a video on it. Others have done videos on it as well. What he discovered was that starlight and looking through a telescope, they don't line up. If you look through the viewfinder and then try to find it in the piece of the telescope, and trust me, having a telescope, this happened all the time. You'd have to tilt the telescope a little bit more to get it in the telescope with the greater power. And the reason is because either we are spinning, causing the light to be bent slightly, or the stars above us are moving past us. And what he decided to do was fill the telescope with water. Water greatly reduces, doesn't reduce it to zero, but it greatly reduces the speed of light. And what he determined was, and what he was expecting was to debunk Michelson-Morley, Michelson-Gale, Sagnac. He was trying to debunk all of those. Because his experiment resulted in the opposite, he no longer had to make an adjustment, or he continued to have to make an adjustment for the light, which meant, I know this probably doesn't make sense if you're not familiar with it because I'm not getting into great detail. The conclusion was the Earth does not move. Now, he wanted his paper published, so he left that out, which is one of the critics' complaints. Oh, he didn't say that the conclusion was that the Earth didn't move, but that's what he was testing for. But he wanted it published, so he just left that blank. And it was published and it was written up. But Airy's failure, it's a very cheap and expensive experiment, and you can trust it's been done over and over again to failure again. But that is the best experiment to date that shows the Earth does not move, and nobody hears about it. There are many people online who attest to have gotten engineering degrees, physics degrees, different things, astronomical degrees, that have never heard of these experiments. They might have heard of Michelson-Morley and Michelson-Gale and things like that, but the reason why they heard about that, Einstein debunked that. Well, Einstein also said that if the speed of light was ever found not to be a constant, that his theory, by necessity, was wrong. And the speed of light is not a constant. We know it is moving. There's some cases where it slows down, some cases where it's not inhibited as much, but over time it has been slowing. By Einstein's own definition, his theory is bunk. And yet that's what we're told today. It's Einstein, Einstein, Einstein. Because just like gravity, it's the magic bullet. It gets rid of the other experiments that people have done with light. Now, the other magic with gravity is, of course, that this is why they can't get rid of it and go with, it's simple. Go with density, buoyancy, and magnetic attraction. It explains everything. What do we get? We get Neil deGrasse Tyson coming out with a microphone and dropping it. And that's settled science to prove that that's gravity. Please. Is it what we pay people hundreds of thousands a year to do? Drop microphones? All right, so we got the problems with cosmology, two of them. If we don't spin, if we're flat, we definitely don't spin. The other proof we have that we're a ball, I have to give them credit, is all the pictures, what, 8 or 9 of them, of the Earth, that they admit are CGI, and no two are a match. I did one video where I actually took the width of Florida and made that my measuring stick and found out, I think it was 7 widths of Florida to get to the western edge of the Gulf of Mexico, from the western edge of Florida to the eastern edge of the Gulf of Mexico. It took 7 widths of Florida in that picture. In the next picture, I think it took 4.5. So the Gulf of Mexico dry up and shrink, the Florida moved west. And we're supposed to believe that even though it's CGI and we have to do it that way, isn't that what they said? By necessity, we have to do it that way. We're supposed to believe that America expands and contracts at about a 40% rate over years. But this is what we get. And nobody in the mainstream questions it because of cognitive dissonance, which is what we need to change. Now, there's something on the side I'm going to talk about here in a minute. I'm calling it ecliptopause. And this is what I want to look into. And the only reason I'm bringing it up now is because it's on my mind. How many people notice that you get this shadow during the eclipse? It keeps moving, gets right over the sun and stops. And it sits there, and it sits there, and it sits there. And then it starts moving again. Except if it came in at 2 o'clock, it doesn't go out at 8 o'clock. It might come in, drop down, and go back out at 10 o'clock. It comes in like it's on a pendulum. What in cosmology explains that? Nothing that I know of. Another interesting thing about the eclipse is that in Arizona, Phoenix, where I'm at, the eclipse basically did come in from the top left and move down to the bottom right. Just 200 or 300 miles south of where I am in Mexico, it was flipped. And there's video of it. It came in the other way. How is that possible? I don't know a way to explain it. I really don't. But these are things we need to look in, and these are like anecdotal little things to throw in over the side. So let me give you some of my walking my dog Charlie experiments. Have you noticed that the seas, what they call the seas on the moon, which are black at night, they turn blue during the day? How is that possible? Not only that, but when you have a waning moon, and this happens a lot when my dog gets me up about 5 a.m., right at sunrise, you go out and you see the moon, it's still close to full, but it's setting. And the sun comes up, and by the end of the walk, I can barely see the moon because it has faded. It becomes transparent. I saw actually a time-lapse video, I meant to capture it, but I missed it, of someone who actually showed that. It showed a nice solid moon, but as it went and the sun was coming up, it faded more and more and more until you just couldn't see it anymore. And it was still obviously in the sky. It hadn't reached sunset point. Weird stuff that we need to look at. So it does become transparent, or it appears to be transparent or translucent at times. Here's another thing I brought up recently. I started noticing light and shadow because the heat in Arizona forces your walks at sunrise and sunset. And I started noticing that colors can be seen still after sunset for quite a while, even to the point where you can barely see your shadow. You can still make out certain bright greens and reds and things like that. But moonlight at night, even when it's much brighter, when there's a very sharp, defined shadow, I can't see colors anywhere. There are no colors to be found. It's got to be a different light. It can't be just a reflection of the sun. We know that if you take color spectrography, I hope I'm saying that right, images of the moon, it falls into the silver spectrum, which is blue. It comes from the blue spectrum. It's silver light coming from the blue spectrum. The sun is yellow, coming from the red spectrum. How is it a reflection? We also have many people, including myself, who have done experiments that I say the moon actually cools, but at worst, it doesn't heat a damn thing. Okay, it just doesn't. One of there's a couple out of the box things with that. I did an experiment that I didn't even realize the video would become that famous, but it was on different news sites where it was the first one I did where I laid a simple wallet out, a black wallet.